Uh, Alrighty, welcome to How She Did It. I am so excited about this Juneteenth special. Happy Juneteenth to everyone as well. This is an exciting opportunity to talk to someone that I admire and adore and appreciate so much for what she's doing in a very competitive space, but also as a woman leader who also gives back to help other people at the same time. And it is a real honor to have Jessica Johnson on the call with us today to talk about how she did it. And you have a magnificent business that you are building, focused on, and was kind enough to actually come to us and share with us the challenges, but also the accomplishments and your strategy for how you're growing the business. But before we begin, I want to welcome you officially to How She Did It, Jessica.
Well, greetings and salutations to you, Cynthia, and to all who are gathered here today, as well as anyone who will be watching the webinar replay. Today is Juneteenth, so we're celebrating independence, right? And the key is that the people were free, they just didn't know they were free. So I'm hoping that our conversation today will turn on a light bulb to help anyone who's watching know that you are indeed free, and to take that independence and to turn it into power as you grow professionally and as you develop your business.
Agreed. And so talk to us a little bit about your background and your history. Before you joined the family business, what did you do before you became CEO of Johnson Security Bureau?
Well, I feel like being the CEO of Johnson Security was in my DNA and I never knew it. Um, I'm blessed because even though our business is third generation, one of the things my father wanted for my brother and I was for us not to have the burden of the business, for us to have the choice to do what we wanted to do. And quite honestly, I was clueless. I thought that my first job would be working on 125th Street in Harlem across from the Apollo Theater selling records. And my father said, "What are you doing?" No, go to school. Uh, and so prior to coming to the company, I worked in several different sales roles. The last role I had was in pharmaceutical sales. Prior to that, I also sold media sales, both radio and newspaper in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then prior to that, I worked in technology sales with a little company called IBM.
Okay, so you had sales background. So that's something did that come natural to you, or is that something that you learned? Talk to me about the sales background and how.
The sales background, oh my gosh, I was so terrible. As a matter of fact, I remember getting fired from my radio sales job shortly after 9/11. So imagine carrying the burden of what the whole nation was going through and lost after 9/11, and plus being a New York City native, being removed from my hometown and knowing that my parents were here, like on 9/11, we were actually trying to figure out where my mother was because she worked in close proximity to the World Trade Center. But at one point, she actually did work in the World Trade Center, but just not during the terror attacks of 9/11. And so sales was critical to me in helping me understand how to tell stories, and helping me understand how to present information, and understand how to get people to change their perception about me and whatever I was selling. Well, it was my business, the business I was representing, the products I was representing, and those sales skills have transitioned and been very, very beneficial to me as an entrepreneur.
We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. So I want, for those who have joined and may not be aware, talk to me about what does Johnson Security Bureau do?
Well, Johnson Security Bureau is a third generation security guard services firm. We protect people, places, and valuable property. And for the majority of our 63 years history, we have been focused on the New York City metropolitan area. More recently, we have expanded our operations as far west as the state of Washington, and we have a significant footprint now in the state of Montana and a growing footprint in the state of Florida. So I guess that makes us a national corporation. But we provide guard services, armored car services, and airport screening services, and our clients tend to represent a couple of specific verticals. Financial services and banking, construction and real estate management, healthcare, and government agencies.
And so the business you mentioned is 63 years old. That's a long time for an operation to be in existence, especially an African-American legacy business. Many of our businesses, when we reach that 5, 7 year, 10-year mark, we are either tired, beat up, or there isn't anyone to hand it to. But that was different for you. So talk to me about how did you then move from sales and selling records?
More so selling air. I wish I sold the records. I really sold the air. So the transition was not planned. I did plan to move back to New York because my dad had become ill. My mother was like, you got to come home and check on your dad because family is very important to us. I didn't realize how sick my dad was. So I thought, I'll come home, deal with his illness, and we'll be good. Within a matter of weeks of my returning to New York, my dad was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That's manageable, right? Then he's like, oh, you gotta take me to the dentist. Went to take him to the dentist, and dentist was like, oh, we gotta pull off his teeth. And it was like, from there, it was like a cascade of different activities with his health. But shortly thereafter, my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the doctors told us he'd probably have about 2 years to live. So we're like, all right, good, we'll plan for this. But God says, the joke is, if you wanna humor God, come up with a plan. And so we planned, my brother and I, and along with our dad, what the next 2 years would look like. My dad passed away within 4 months. And so my brother and I were in the hospice center just a few hours before my dad transitioned. And my brother said, JJ, that's what my family called me, JJ, what are we going to do? We have these 16 people who work for us because the business had contracted under my dad's leadership while he was sick. And so we only had 16 employees. We only had 2 clients. And so my brother said, what are we going to do? We got these people who work for us. They depend on us. We're based in the South Bronx, New York. You might have heard the Bronx is burning. You might have heard of the Bronx Bombers, the Yankees. But there are not a lot of positive perceptions about the neighborhood where we were raised. And so my brother said, if we don't take care of the people who work for us, the people who have faithfully shown up every day while daddy was sick, before he was sick, what are they going to do? They have families. They have to pay rent. They have to eat. They have to send their kids to school. If we decide to sell the business, what we'll do, we're going to go on a nice vacation and maybe have a little bit of money in the bank. Is that the legacy that our grandparents really intended? And so my brother and I decided that we would make a go of it. We would take over the business and continue the legacy that our grandparents before us had created and that our father had maintained in his health. And so my dad transitioned October 4th, 2008. This year will make 17 years since he left us. And I've been running the company literally from the moment that he left. 17 years.
Let me first say my condolences to your loss, and from my heart. 17 years, what have you learned from day one when you took over to where you are today? And then we'll get into the strategies of how you had to build it.
Well, one of the first things I learned, and this was a somewhat hard lesson, having grown up in the business, having known many of our team members for an extremely long amount of time, was there were people in the organization that were loyal to my dad and not necessarily loyal to business, nor were they loyal to me. So I learned early on that I had to find my own people. I had to find my own tribe who believed in my vision and were going to help me to execute on my vision to extend my family's legacy. You mentioned that a lot of businesses don't make it past 5 or 10 years. And so when you talk to people about legacy businesses that have been working for decades, they may be familiar with the big brands. You say a McDonald's, a Johnson and Johnson, a Coca-Cola. Those brands ring true to people. But when you're talking about small business, a lot of times people can't fathom multi-generational businesses that are small and family owned and led. They're like, no, that's not real to me. And so it's hard for them to embrace the vision.
Yes.
So I had to get my own people. And one of the first people that we had to part ways with was our office manager, who was by my dad's side until the day before he passed away. But she doubted my leadership ability. She even told people, oh, she's going to run the business into the ground. And so rather than being able to focus on growing the business on a day-to-day basis, I was coming into my office, my work home, and I was butting heads with someone I was paying who was supposed to be supporting the mission and the vision of the organization. And so within a matter of months, she was gone. And I was like, oh, now I got to figure out how to do this on my own. But God is so graceful, and I'm grateful for the people who are around me who did believe in me. And there were some people who just said, you know what, I don't know you, but I knew your father. Your father helped me to get my first job. Your father helped me when I needed a place to stay. Your father introduced me to somebody who helped me get my kid into college. And so, and I heard similar stories around people's relationships with and love for my grandmother, who had been an elementary school guidance counselor in the New York City public schools before she and my grandfather started the business. And so there's an elected official here in New York who, as a teenager, wanted to go to Africa, and his parents told him, well, you got to raise your own money. And he came to my grandmother, and my grandmother gave him a job, and he worked right around the corner, what's now Hostos Community College, as a security guard. And he saved up the money to take his first trip to Africa, and subsequently came back, went to college, ran for political office in New York, and held one of the highest ranks as a Black official here in the state, as the head of the New York County Democratic Committee. And he still fondly recalls my grandmother giving him an opportunity. So it was the seeds that my grandmother, my grandfather, and my father had sown, that I was able to then go and pick the fruit from those trees some years and in some cases decades later. And people who believed in them believed enough in me to give me help, to point me in the right direction, to give me information, and to help us get on a path that leads us to where we are today.
I love this. So there were two things that you had to learn. Number one, you had to see who was going to believe in the vision, but also believe in you and stick with the company as you navigated this boat to get it to a new place. And then also looking at, well, who's in my network that you could lean on to help you navigate as well outside of the business. Those were really important. And also maintaining those relationships as well that your family had developed over time by just being who they were. Now, developing relationships and networking are really important, and you do that a lot. You are often conferences and networking with people, learning, listening, growing, connecting, and so forth. Why is that important, Jessica?
Well, you know how they say your network is your net worth. I think that none of us are able to do any of the things that we do independently. And so I don't think I realized at a young age how important my network is and was. But as I've matured and as I've navigated life's opportunities, so many doors have opened as a result of saying a kind word, remember somebody's name, following up with them on their birthday. And it's something that I also watched my grandmother and other members of the family do quite graciously. My grandmother was a woman who was raised in the Deep South. She graduated from Fayetteville College in North Carolina and continued to send money back to Fayetteville. But one of the things I watched her do as a little girl was she was always reaching back and staying connected with the community back in North Carolina, back at her college, with the people at church and the people in the union that she had worked with in the schools here. And she was one who was always sending thank you notes. And she made my brother and I send thank you notes. And so, particularly when I was getting started in this business here at Johnson Security in my role, I'm dating myself, I would take the business cards that my dad had in his Rolodex. And nobody has Rolodexes anymore because like most of our contacts are either in a CRM or in our phones. And I would just call people, hey, did you know my dad? Did you know my grandmother? And then after request an informational interview, meet people for coffee, they would tell me to go places, I would do that. And then I would follow up with them. And it's real. The network is one piece, but it's the power of the follow-up.
Yeah.
So it was the combination of the two. And then the further I got in my entrepreneurial journey here at Johnson Security, I realized how important people I had met to different parts of my life would end up being. Like people I went to elementary and middle and high school with, or leaning into organizations that I was introduced to while I was in college, or the folks that I worked with early on in my professional career, coming back together with them. One example of whom you might be familiar is my friend Wylori Taylor. Wylori and I, who was also a business advisor as part of the Goldman Sachs 1 Million Black Women Black in Business program, Wylori and I started our first jobs out of college together at IBM. And we've remained friends for nearly, I'm not going to tell, but a long time. And seeing each other pivot on career-wise, and then can come to one another and say, hey, I noticed you were doing this. Are you part of this community? Do you know this person? I think this would be helpful. And just last night we were texting about some personal things. Girl, I need to get my hair braided. Who should I call? Call my girl. And then girl, I just want to say thank you for making that introduction. It's really helped me to build my network. It's really helped me to build my toolkit as I go on to the next step of my journey. And so just never underestimating the power of your network and what each interaction may mean, and not trying to make it transactional, or not necessarily trying to monetize it, but just being genuine, being in the moment with people, and remembering them. Because at the end of the day, we all want to have some kind of legacy and we prefer for it to be positive. So it's those little interactions with people that make a big difference personally, professionally, and in business.
And so thank you for that. There's a key point here, and Michelle mentioned in the chat there, it's the follow-up that matters, and not making it transactional, and really focusing on the reciprocal relationship. How can we help each other, and not forgetting that someone else helped you. I often see the younger generation, it's me, when there's been other people along the way who've helped you get to where you are, or help you to accomplish what you've done. And it's okay to be proud of ourselves, but we also have to remember who was there to help and guide you, or support and provide to you. I agree and completely agree with that. So now, 17 years ago, we walk into this business. We're new, we have to take the reins, we have to make changes. Tell me, what condition was the business in, because it had contracted? And then I want to lead into what strategies did you use to begin and figure out, how am I going to grow this business? Because at one point you really probably had to think about, do I want to grow this business? And is it possible to grow this business? So let's talk about, where did you start?
So we basically started as a 40-plus-year-old startup. because the way that my grandparents got accounts and the type of businesses opportunities that they targeted were not necessarily what we were looking at in 2008, right? So to level set the context, when my grandparents started this business, it was in 1962. It was at the height of the civil rights era. My grandmother could not get a mortgage for a home unless she had someone to sign for her, even though she was an educated woman working on her PhD at Columbia Teachers College. She couldn't get a mortgage on her own. So in order to start the business, she literally had to work with my grandfather. And he was dynamic as well, because, he came up from the South and was like, hey, babe, we're going to do this. We're going to make a difference for our kids. So the challenges that they faced were very different than the challenges that I faced. I feel like I have it easy compared to what they had to do.
Yeah.
And they start the business in 62. My grandfather makes his transition in 75. So here my grandmother is trying to run the business in a male-dominated industry, where people don't really want her to succeed. They started the business during segregation. So initially, many of the only clients who would use us were other Black businesses, because we were kind of regulated to our own communities. And that's very different now. We may say that we don't have a level playing field, but I still have the opportunity to pitch to Fortune 500 companies, to pitch to government agencies, and I don't have the same encumbrances that they have. So picture a 40-plus-year-old startup that has a little bit of money in the bank, that has a couple of accounts, but many of those accounts are not transferable. They're like really just goodwill accounts. And I had to figure out, where do I want to take this business? What does opportunity look like for us? And even though I had worked in business, I never led an organization. I didn't even lead a team. And so I was really operating outside of my zone of excellence. So I would encourage anyone who's on the call, regardless of what your current role is, understand what your gifts and talents are, what's your zone of excellence, and how you can blow your talents and skills out of the water in every opportunity that you have. And then those opportunities the areas where you don't have strengths, either outsource or bring in other people who specialize in those areas and let them take it and let them lead those opportunities for you. Because if I try to be the IT specialist, I'm gonna be all day doing something that's not in my gift, and it's taken me away from being excellent. As an example, we trying to get to how we got here now, but right before this call, I was preparing a document for a client, and I probably should have handed it off to our attorney, but I know the time it takes to send this document to the attorney to get her feedback, it's going to be a number of days before I can turn this around to the client. So I said, okay, let me just look at what we've used in the past, compare notes, make some quick notes. It was an NDA, so it didn't really require a lot of time. Nonetheless, it did require enough attention. And I said, okay, I can do this. I can finish it in time. I'm gonna have to put my lips on before I go and talk to Cynthia. Was able to do that. Next time that happens, Natalie, my attorney, she's going to get that and she's going to take care of it. And so just figuring out where your strengths are and not taking away from your areas of excellence, let somebody else specialize in that. And I knew that we had to grow because in the community where we're based, there are no big Fortune 500 companies coming to bring jobs here. One of the biggest employers in the area is the New York Yankees, and they don't even operate 12 months out of the year. And a lot of time when the games are over, they pack up their stuff and they go home, and the community is still here. So understanding the context in which my grandparents started the company and where they wanted to create opportunity for people in their neighborhood, in their community, who look like them, who look like their children, who may not get other opportunities elsewhere, it was important that we be the change we wanted to see in our neighborhood. And so growth was essential in terms of creating jobs with living wages, creating jobs where people felt respected. To this day, I still call my team members by their last name, and I have young people that are like, like, you make me sound old. No, because one of the things my grandmother stressed is when somebody walked in our doors to call them by their last name, because there were many places where they were not respected. And when they came to Johnson Security Bureau, they were going to be respected, and calling them Miss, Mr., and last name was a way to show respect. And so creating a place of respect where we were generating jobs, generating revenues, putting money back and investing in the community, and demonstrating to clients and prospective clients what excellence can look like for a firm that is owned and managed by a family, owned and managed by people of color, owned and managed by a woman. And so where I didn't know what I was doing, I went and asked for help. And so I was able to tap into a lot of different programs. If you'd like, I can kind of tell you, I could share some of the programs that helped us along the trajectory since 2008. One of the first programs we participated in was the Kaufman Fast Track. Kaufman out of Kansas City is an entrepreneurial firm, which is interesting because one of the pharmaceutical companies for whom I worked, Kaufman was an investor in a big part of the community where they were headquartered. And so then to go through the Kaufman Fast Track, just understand business. How do you set up a business? I'm like, all right, that's nice. That didn't really move the needle for me. We got registered with our PTACs, which stands for Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. They've now been rebranded as the Apex Accelerators. And the Apex Accelerators, or PTACs, are funded through our tax dollars. So as a small business owner, an aspiring small business owner, you can leverage their services for free because we as taxpayers have already paid for that. And so the Apex Accelerator helped us to get on bid lists. They helped us to get certified with our minority certification, our women-owned business certification, our DBE disadvantaged business certification for transportation projects. They also have a keyword search tool to help us identify contracting opportunities to pursue. And so the Apex Accelerators, we registered with like 3. I don't know if you can do that now, but they were very helpful in helping us get technical assistance, get information on access to capital, and getting those certifications, which we were subsequently able to leverage as we were growing the business. The Apex Accelerator at LaGuardia Community College had contacted me about February of 2010 and said that Goldman Sachs was starting a new program that they were going to house at LaGuardia Community College, and that based on the program information, they thought it would be a good fit for me and my business. And I remember vividly, I was telling my mother about the call, and I said, well, Goldman Sachs doesn't know anything about me. They don't care about my business. They're not going to help me. And my mother, who has wisdom beyond her years, and even though she retired from a career in public service working for the New York State Health Department, she recognized opportunity. She said, no, what you do is you apply for their program and you make them tell you no. You don't opt out and make the decision not to pursue this opportunity. And it's one of the best pieces of advice she's ever given me. I applied for Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. I had an interview with the head of the Goldman Sachs Foundation, the head of LaGuardia Community College, the head of one of the recruiting partners at the time, the woman who subsequently ran the program at LaGuardia, and a few other key stakeholders. And I also remember vividly going in for the interview, and Zena Powell McCormick, who was kind of the godmother of 10,000 Women and 10,000 Small Businesses, she asked me mid-sentence, what would you do if someone gave you money to grow your business? And I said, I don't want any money. My dad always told me don't owe anyone anything. And so she was like, no, but what if you could leverage someone else's money to grow your business? What difference would that make for you? What difference would that make for your employees and your community? And she arrested my attention with that question because I had never thought about that. And going into that interview, My expectation was that if we could grow this business 20% over the following 5 years, and I could get the company to its 50th anniversary, that my work would be done. I could go get a corporate job with a car allowance and a lot of paid time off, um, and so what, we were accepted into the program, went to through the program, created our growth plan, and in 6 months
Mhm.
we accomplished what I thought we would do in 5 years.
Wow. Wow. That's
And that program literally changed the trajectory of my life, of my business. From there we went on to get certified with WeBank and NMSDC, WeBank Women's Business Enterprise National Council, and MSDC National Minority Supplier Development Council, and to participate in some of the capacity building technical assistance programs that they offered through some of the corporate sponsors. We also participated in the Salesforce Black owned business sponsorship and mentor program during the pandemic, in addition to the Ernst & Young Entrepreneurs Access Network, which is also another game changer. I see some of my EAN family on the call. Hey, shout out Kalila. And the content helped, right? And being able to put the content to work in real time was extremely beneficial. But beyond that, the network of other entrepreneurs, to be able to lean into my peers who may not be in the same industry, but were experiencing similar challenges, and hearing how people were facing those challenges, to be able to find a tribe of people to pursue work opportunities together, that was enriching. And then also to find in these sponsor corporations strategic partners. So I may not get a contract with Salesforce, I may not get a contract with EY, but to be able to get access to executives who are working with global companies, and in some cases with countries, and advising them, and to be able to glean from that advice, that has positioned me way in advance of similarly sized firms in my industry, and helped to differentiate me from some of the larger firms in the industry. So those are some of the programs that were able to help us grow along the past 17 years, to put us where we are today.
So there are three things that I am observing and listening to you that have worked for you to help. One is showing up and being in the right rooms and being open to saying yes to opportunities that you may not think on the surface are beneficial, but you don't know that unless you try. And that's one of the things that your mother was saying to you. And then number two, ensuring that you're at home, meaning your work home, that it still can run while you're out there connecting and making these or creating these relationships that are filling your cup, your knowledge cup, so that you have more information, but also more access to opportunities that you would never get the opportunity to have if you didn't show up, which is a lot of times for our minority-owned businesses. We are so busy keeping our head down and focusing on working in the business that we don't look up to see opportunities and don't explore and then execute following. And that pulls us back and keeps us at the same level without growing. But because of the work that you've been putting in, and it's not easy, because I see you are out in front, you are out there, and it's not easy to do all of that and still come back and manage the work office and the administrative piece to all of this. So that's really important, but also kudos to you for being vulnerable and open to that, because that's not always the case for many CEOs.
Well, thank you for recognizing that, because I think part of the journey, particularly for entrepreneurs of color, is we've been misled about what it means to be an entrepreneur. When you think historically of how, well, at least in my lifetime, how we think about people who are self-employed, people who are entrepreneurs, there's a correlation between being a hustler.
Yes.
And hustler, when we break down the word, there are usually negative connotations with hustling. You think of somebody who's on a corner, somebody's in a dark alley, somebody's in a back room.
Mhm.
We don't necessarily think of the hustle mentality in a positive light, right? And typically the hustlers leave a negative impact on their communities. And as our society evolved and we got out of the farmland and moved into more industrialized society, more people started going to college. And the value was in going to college, getting a good job, and getting that corporate job where you would stay and retire, or being a civil servant where you would stay until you retired. And so people who chose not to take those routes were often looked down upon.
Mhm.
And largely because people who took the traditional routes didn't understand.
Yeah.
They don't understand the journey. They don't understand the hustle. And so I remember in my last job talking to someone, and they say, "Oh, you work too hard. You need to slow down. Like, why don't you stop?" And I was like, "Oh, I could sleep. I could sleep when I die, because I never sleep, because sleep is the cousin of death." Here I'm quoting Nas to this middle-aged man, and he was like, "That is not right.
Mhm.
Like, you need to change your mindset,
Mhm.
because that will get you sick, that will get you dead. You need to find balance.
Mhm.
You need to not hustle. You need to put in the work, but there's a way to put in the work without overextending yourself." And I heard him, but it didn't make sense until I lost my hearing. I was working my pharmaceutical job full time. I
Yeah.
would come home in the evenings for the first few months, and I would do my security work, and was trusting that the office manager was doing everything else. And then I woke up one day, and I went to answer the phone. I put the phone to my ear. I couldn't hear anything, and I said, "Ugh, why people keep playing on my phone?" Hung up the phone rang again, put it to my ear, I didn't hear anything. And then, like, my ear was kind of sore, so I turned over on my side and put the phone to my other ear. And clear as day, I heard my uncle say, "Hello." And I was like, "Wait, hold up." I put the phone back to the other ear, didn't hear anything. I told my uncle thank you, hung up with him, called my mother. I was like, "Something's wrong. I can't hear."
Mhm.
Went to stand up, I had vertigo, I couldn't get my balance. Um, my mom met me at the hospital, we got some testing. Come to find out, I had an inner ear infection because I wasn't sleeping or wasn't eating, I didn't have that balance, and I lost my hearing. And the audiologist thought, "Maybe we can give you some steroid injections and the hearing will come back." Yeah, nope, that was 17 years ago. Still don't have my hearing in this ear. And so it's I was forced to have a mindset shift around the hustle,
Yes.
and forced to have to prioritize self-care.
Yes.
And I think had it not been for losing my hearing, I would have still been trying to serve the man and serve my business.
Mhm.
Um, but once I lost my hearing, I reflected to a conversation I had with my manager um, at the last pharmaceutical company where I worked, about a management position. And I was like, "Yeah, I want to be a sales manager because I can sell and I can help people sell." I finally figured out how to sell, by the
Mhm.
way. And then he said, "Well, why should I hire you?" And I don't know, out of the blue, I said to him, "I choose to show up and work for you." I said, "At any point in time, I can leave. There's a company with my name on the door. I can go back there." And I had never thought about that. I had never expressed that to anyone, but that conversation just came out the blue. And once I had that conversation, it's like I couldn't bring those words back.
No, no.
And so that's when I realized I was building somebody else's dream
Mm.
when there was my own set of dreams that I could be building. And I'm reminded of that conversation on a regular basis now as an entrepreneur, a full-time entrepreneur in my own business, and have since worked with my husband, and we've taken over his family business to start a new enterprise called The Soapbox, and doing some fun things with him. But yeah, like that mindset shift about what it means to be an entrepreneur, what the entrepreneurial journey is, what it is to have an entrepreneurial tribe, and building your own dreams.
Yeah. I got chill bumps, honestly, when you said I have a business with my name on it that I could go back to. Let that sit with all of us for just a moment, right? Because when you look at our positions in the economy and how, as you mentioned, we have been trained on get a job, stay with a job, retire, and then you have your outliers who go out on their own to build something of their own. And when you look at where we are today in this political climate and economic space that we're in, there's this kind of let's put them back into their place happening right now. Don't forget you have a door with your name on it that you could be building. That's powerful, in my opinion. And don't be afraid to build it.
And
And
you mentioned young people,
mhm,
how young people have a different approach today. I
mhm,
think young people are more in tuned
mhm.
with
Yeah,
building their dreams.
yeah,
And that's part of the reason why um, they there's this disconnect in the workforce. It's not that they don't work. It's not that they don't want to work. It's that they want to be rewarded for the work that they do. They want to have a positive impact and make a difference.
yeah,
And how they look at work, the nature of work is different.
yeah.
And so we can't be so quick to judge
Mhm.
because we created the millennials and the Gen Zers and Gen Alpha, right? Those,
Yes.
those are our children,
Yeah.
and they've watched us,
Mhm.
and they're making different choices as
Yes.
a result of what they've seen us do. So now the question is, or the opportunity is, what do we need to do differently
Mhm.
to have a greater positive impact on the next generations? And then what can we learn from them
Yeah.
as we start, grow, and scale our businesses? Because they're going to be consuming the products and services that we offer largely. And if we can't speak their language, communicate, or sell to them,
Yeah.
then that doesn't mean good long-term prospects for us and what we have. And so it's not necessarily a negative thing. And I could think of a conversation I had with my grandmother shortly after I lost my job at the radio station. Um, I hadn't told my family that I got laid off because I was like, what they gonna do? They gonna tell me to come home. I'm not coming home. And my grandmother said, you've had 3 jobs since you graduated from college.
Mhm.
I wouldn't hire you to work for me.
Oh,
That seems like you're unstable. Love my grandmother, one of the biggest influencers in my life. And I said, well, I wouldn't want to work for you anyway. And as a more mature adult, as a professional, as an entrepreneur, I reflect on that conversation. And if she were still alive today, I would have a different conversation with her.
mhm, mhm,
I would ask her why. And then I would explain why I made my choices. And I would hope that she would give me more insight into her choices, and that as different generations, we could work together to kind of bridge the gap on what the difference is. Um, um, you can always be learning.
mhm.
Just I missed the opportunity when she was alive to dig deeper. But now, as the elder statesman in my business, I'm like, oh, I can see why my grandmother thought that. Oh, I can see why I thought that.
Mhm.
Okay, now now how do I deal with the next me? So my I have a 4-year-old niece, I have a 14-year-old niece and a 4-year-old niece who, if they want to, can come into the business. And the 4-year-old, she tells us all the time, I'm the mini boss. Like she will tell you her what she thinks. She will ask you for what she wants, and she knows what it means to go to work. As a matter of fact, she tells her parents, when I go to New York on vacation, I'm going to the office. Well, why do you like to go to the office? Because that's where you go to work. Because
Mm,
I'm the mini boss.
mhm.
And so as I think about our mini boss and her peers, what kind of examples do we need to set for them so that they can take on the mantle and lead in their own style, right? It can't be we put them in Goliath's. I mean, Sam. that they're David, that they're using a slingshot and they're not trying to put on a giant's armor, and that they're working with their tools and their skills to fight the battles in front of them and win on their terms.
Yeah, I see that a lot with the younger generation. And at first, I have to say, about 5 years ago, it used to make me clutch my pearls. I'm deep from the South, and there are just ways that you do things, the way that you say things, the way that you behave, those things that were instilled in me. But then I had this revelation that you have the master's mindset, that you have got to change and be open to how they have grown up differently and be open to it. But then I looked at it from, they are so courageous and brave. Like, there's a person in Dallas, her name is Tashara Parker, if I'm saying her name correctly, and how she showed up on Channel 8 with loud and bold and just very proud of her being Black and on television, just blew my mind. Because I have to admit, I may be courageous, I'm not that brave. And I loved it. And I love to see how brave that they really are. But I also want to ensure that they have information, education, and skills to do it right, be loud and right. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because that is important as leaders, as CEOs, that we are looking at this generation differently and making sure that we're pouring into them. Because I have to say, I've worked in the political space and had connections, and a lot of the politicians did not feed into us. The older generation, they looked at us as competition, didn't feed into us. There was opportunity, yes. Did they carve the way? Yes. But did they teach us and take us under their wing? There was only one man, Calvin Stevens, that took me and 11 others under his wing. But for the most part, they didn't. They didn't teach us. And I think we have the opportunity to do so by opening our minds. So I'm glad you brought that up as we look at how can we be better leaders and CEOs. I wanted to veer off for a moment, but I'm back. So let's talk about strategies. How do you grow to a $10 million business to a 25 million business? And let me say this right now, Jessica, that it is hard for people of color, minority-owned business owners, particularly sometimes Black women, to even fathom building a business with that type of revenue. It's hard for you to picture it. And if you can't picture it, you can't get to it. How do you do it?
So a couple of things, right? And this is a rich conversation. Part of it is who is your circle of influence, right? You know, what's this expression? Look at the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I can tell you what your bank account is going to look like, right? And so if we spend our time with the e-betters, and I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way, but if we spend our time with the folks who are worried about how much money they have on their EBT cards, then we probably have EBT cards. If we are having conversations with thousandaires, we'll probably be thousandaires. So where are we positioning ourselves, and around what kind of people? What kind of conversations are they having, and what type of opportunities are they pursuing? And so I would dare say that for many of us, the problem is not that we aren't capable, it's that our vision is just not large enough. That interaction with Gina Powell McCormick during the interview for 10,000 Small Businesses kind of opened my eyes to that. I thought it was 20% 5 years, 20% in 6 months. And so the Bible says in Habakkuk 2, write the vision, make it plain so that men may run with it. It all starts with the vision. What vision do you have for your business? What visions do you have for yourself? Be very specific. My attorney, Marsha Griggs, used to say to me, Jess, what is it that you see? Describe it to me. Describe it to me in detail. And I said, oh, I think I want to be a manager in business. And she's like, no, that's not good enough. She said, I can tell you, if you ask me what my vision is, I'm going to be a corporate attorney with a mahogany desk. It's going to be, you can see my degrees behind me on the wall. I could tell you what the wallpaper looks like, and I can even tell you what shade of nail polish I'm wearing. She said specifics. When you have specific details, that helps people to help you achieve your vision. If you don't have clarity, then you need to get in places where you can still yourself and get a clear vision for what you want and where you want to be. I heard Ariane Simone of the Fearless Fund say, the universe moves out of the way for people who know where they're going. So it starts with you as the leader, having that clarity, having that vision, writing it down in detail with specifics, and then sharing that vision with the right people. Not everybody, because everybody's not going to understand your vision. And I laugh because I mentioned that my husband and I, we have a business together, and we also run this business together. I remember before I started dating him, I dated this guy that works at some big fancy company. And then I was like, oh, I left my pharmaceutical job to run my family's business. He was like, what? That little thing? And so I'm trying to be more intentional in my conversation, even what I post on social, especially on LinkedIn. I do have a community of small businesses, but when I think about my business, I don't want to be limited by seeing us as a small business because we're small for now.
Yeah.
And then I was like, huh, what? Like, this is my family. What you talking about? Like, it's like, you're a loser. Bye. Which opened the door for me to meet my husband. And now we're doing big things. So you have to have that vision. So I have a vision. The other thing is you have to follow the bag. I'm not saying you're paper chasing, but know where people are spending the money. That was one of the early lessons I learned as a result of being connected with our local Apex Accelerator. I met some folks who work at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Those are the people that run the airports here in New York, LaGuardia, JFK, Newark Airport. They also run some of the large bridges and tunnels, and they have their own train system. And Jorge Mercado, who is one of the procurement specialists, said to me, Johnson, look where the money is going. And those are the projects where you should focus your attention. What? And I don't know if you remember when President Obama came into office, he made a big push around infrastructure projects. And so that's one of the reasons why we got our GBE certification, because that's specific to transportation and it's race neutral. And so I said, oh, okay, we can get a couple of projects on transportation because it's not sexy, right? Because the money's not always where the sexy things are. We said, okay, maybe we get on one bridge, one tunnel. What I didn't realize at the time is those infrastructure projects tend to be much larger in size.
Yes.
They tend to last for longer periods of time.
Yes.
And because they're not sexy, most people will turn their noses up and walk away. We've since worked on 3 bridges. We've worked on 1 tunnel project. Potentially we'll work on another tunnel project, and are working and doing a lot of transportation focused construction work where other people just wouldn't focus. And we've eaten very well as a result of that. So I say growing the business starts at following the bag, seeing who's spending the money on what things, and how what you do, how you can serve that segment. One of the other things is realizing we're in the people business. So even though I have a security license, if I don't know how to communicate and connect with people, I'm not going to go anywhere. And people might see me on TV and it looks like I'm doing fun things. Ultimately, I'm not the person that brings in the money. I might get the contracts, but if I don't have people that go to work, then the firm isn't going to make any money. And so understanding how your business, your product, your service relates to people and meeting people where they are is critical in growing and scaling the business. Also, working on strategic relationships. We talked about how you can't do it by yourself, but I'm always in awe of how our strategic partners are able to advocate and be sponsors and speak my name, speak the firm's name in places and spaces that I can't access on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, they come back to me and speak life into me. So we talked about the vision not being big enough. I remember one conversation I had with Lloyd Blankfein, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. And we were in a coaching session and he turns and he says, Ms. Johnson, do you have 7,000 guards yet?
Mm-hmm.
And my initial response was, Mr. Blankfein, I like to sleep at night. No. And then it's almost as if the Holy Spirit hit me upside the head, like Rafiki in Lion King. I said, shut up. I said, no, sir, not yet. Because if this man who runs this global bank is able to see that for me, what don't I see to move from having 16 employees on October 4th, 2008 to employing 7,000 people? And today we employ over 200 people in 4 different states, right? So having strategic partners who can see things in you that you can't see in yourself and are able to speak those things into you so that you can see that as part of the vision for yourself and for your business, that's critical. And then asking smart questions. I think quite often as entrepreneurs, and I want to be mindful of time, we think we have to have all the answers. And it makes me giggle when I go into a situation and I'm prepared and I say, wait, I just have 1 or 2 questions, X, Y, and Z. And they say, that's a smart question. I never thought about that. I think it's disarming to people when you ask questions, especially questions that you've prepared. I think people value being challenged intellectually.
Yes.
And it leads them to look at you differently than the Acme generic brand. And so those are some of the key things to get from 10 million, 25 million, 100 million is just following the bag, having the strategic partners, asking smart questions, building up the people part of your business.
Yeah, excellent advice. Because of time, I just want to see if there are 1 or 2 questions. We have about a minute left that you would like to ask. Please feel free to either raise your hand, present the question. If not, then we will round it out. Does anyone have any questions for Jessica? Check the chat. What are other ways you can expand your vision? Okay, what are other ways you can expand your vision?
I love that question. So, I don't know about you, but I always see all these programs that want to mentor Black women. Understand that Black women are over mentored, we're under sponsored, we're under advocated for. So again, surrounding yourselves with people who have a larger vision. And they might not be people that you know directly, but between what's available online, you can go to YouTube University, you can listen to audio books and read and see what people are doing in other spaces and then borrow from them. One of our partners specializes in explosive detection services. They have a remote service, but they started that service as a result of reading an article in the New York Times about physicians who were offshore reviewing medical scans. So just being open to new information, learning from others in other industries, and seeing how people do things on a larger scale. I was like, why not me? Why can't we? That's how you can help start to expand your vision.
I like that. It's very true. I want to say this has been fantastic. I think it's very valuable for people to understand that in businesses that are not sexy, you can build really strong businesses that are sustainable, but there are keys to doing it. But you got to do the work. And that's what you've been doing for 17 years, and you're doing it well. And I think that this is inspirational for folks to see that not only because you're a woman and because you're Black, but because you're smart and you're open, and then you take that information and you formulate it into something that is executable, is why you're achieving the accomplishments that you are. And so I appreciate you showing up and sharing that insight with everyone today.
Thank you, Miss Cynthia. And two quick reminders. Tell your story. Don't let people put you in a box. Control your own narrative, and you tell the parts that are important to you, because somebody needs to hear your story. They need to be inspired by you and need to know that someone that looks like them or someone that looks like you has made an achievement, however small you might think it is. It might mean a mountain to someone else. And then track your progress as you look back and see where you've been. If you really take the time to measure, you'll be surprised by how far you've come. So don't forget to track, and don't forget to own your own narrative and tell your own story. And Cynthia, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do just that today.
It's beautiful. I appreciate it. This was sponsored by KPIXAI. If you ever need help, visit KPIXAI.com to develop your growth strategy, as well as Wells Fargo Foundation. I appreciate their support, and I appreciate you all being here. And this will be posted on YouTube if you want to go back and take additional notes. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and thank y'all for being here. Okay.